have you. I mean, I'm really glad it stopped raining and nobody had to drown on the way over here. This is just a thrilling night for me and for Malvern Books. It was several months ago. I mean, we were a brand new store when Malachi called us and said, "Can I read at your store?" And we were like, "Yeah, who is this guy?" And we looked him up and he was like, "Damn, this guy's really good. And he wants to read at our store." And so we were, it was very exciting. And and then he said, "Well, I've got this guy to read with me. He's agreed. He's got a book coming out. His name's Mike McGriff." And I knew Mike because Mike, wanders in the store every once in a while. He's really a sweet guy. And so I was like, man, what a night. So I've been looking forward to this for months. And the fact that they both have these new books out that are just so outstanding is really, really exciting. So we're going to start with Mike McGriff tonight. Mike, according to all the websites I found, hails originally from Coos Bay, Oregon. I say that because Malachi's from the other side of the country, and so they meet here in Austin. Let's turn off the music. I mean, that's nice, but it got a little bit voluminous there, a little bit loud. But Mike's books we've had in the store since day one. We've had his poetry book. I think it's from Copper Canyon, Home Burial, here since the very beginning. Mike, yes, can be found on our Nobel Prize table as a translator of Thomas Transstormer's The Sorrow. And now he's here with what has been referred to as a whip-smart fiction debut, a beautiful, devastating little book. And it's just really awesome to have Mike read from Our Secret Life at the Movies. Thanks.
That's amazing. I wonder what person this was the perfect height for.
She's right here.
Well, my name is Mike. Thanks for coming. This is a fun night for me because at some point Malachi and I both lived in Salt Lake City. And we would go hiking in the snow, talk about the books we were working on, Malachi's book that he'll read from you tonight, and this book I was still working on. So, tons of fun. Get my time. Read for 20 minutes or so. And this book is called Our Secret Life in the Movies. It's a book of whatever you want to call them, flash fiction, prose poems, microfiction. It's published by the great Austin Press. It's a strange object. And there you go. And Jill and Callie, the editors and publishers, are here tonight. You should hunt them down, talk with them. But here's the introduction to the book that will tell you all you need to know. We wrote Our Secret Life in the Movies in San Francisco. We, myself, and Josh Tyree. It's written by two people, sets of stories. In a shared sublet a block away from Mission Dolores, the site of Carlotta Valdez's grave and Hitchcock's Vertigo, we'd hatched a plan to watch every film in the Criterion Collection's sweeping catalog of world cinema classics over the course of a single year. This obsession fed off pizza boxes, Sambuca fumes, and whatever is damaged on the Y chromosome. We watched film after film, as many as 2 or 3 a day, and wrote stories inspired by them. For each film, 2 stories, a double take. After completing a dozen sketches, it became obvious that we were writing a fragmented book of linked snapshots, chronicling our parallel trajectories as the last children of the Cold War, coming of age in the 1980s amidst the white noise of intercontinental ballistic mayhem and Reaganomics. We all have a secret life in the movies, in which the pictures seep through our dreams until fantasy and reality become hopelessly blurred. We are in the movies, and the movies are in us. Josh wrote most of that. He's a really great writer. I wrote all the good pieces in the book, however. So for each movie there are 2 sketches, and I'll just read my sketches. In the Forests of the Night, after For All Mankind by Al Reinert. Dwayne became my foster brother right after William the Fridge Perry and the Chicago Bears toured the malls and daytime TV shows of America with the Super Bowl Shuffle. For our 9th birthdays, Dwayne got a ticket to space camp, and I got a set of fatigues and an Amtrak ticket to visit Ron O'Farrell, my dad's Vietnam buddy who ran a hunting service outside Wyoming. My parents always said that Dwayne was blessed. Ron O'Farrell owned 200 acres of scrubby land outside Laramie. For $10,000, you could pay Ron to track a mountain lion, run it up a tree with his hounds, and trap it there until you arrived to shoot it down. Then Ron would take your picture as you knelt over the cat, dog sitting at attention by your side. The picture would arrive in an aspen frame that Ron put together with small hand-forged nails. He would stuff and mount the cat himself, then freight it to you. After trailing the dogs in behind the three-wheelers, we set up camp and slept in a tent for 3 days while we waited for someone to fly in from Newark. The dogs went mad. The man from Newark was dressed in a wool jacket trimmed with marbled brown leather. He had to choose between a rifle and a compound bow to shoot the cat from 10 yards. The mountain lion's eyes glowed when the fire died and the night came out. The dogs never stopped baying, tethered in different spots around the tree, flipping around and pulling wildly at their stakes. The only time the cat moved was when the man shot it in the side with an arrow. It took it a few hours to go limp before it fell to the crunchy alpine duff. Ron slapped the man on the back and shouted, "That's the one," as he released the dogs. That night, I drove one of the three-wheelers to a clearing and lit it on fire, hoping that Dwayne could see it as he orbited above. As a child, I was convinced that in space camp you actually went to space. And then later I found out only rich kids got to go to space camp. It was horribly crushing. Water, after Miami Vice by Michael Mann. After he got a settlement from a slip-and-fall case against Warehouse Foods, my dad's friend Jack bought a flat-bottom fiberglass speedboat and a storage unit business on the edge of town. The boat had a metal flake root beer brown finish. He took fleshy women with loud sunglasses to the lake on the weekends. He called it his go-fast boat and kept it in one of the storage units. Before I could legally work, I got an under-the-table job at the do-it-yourself car wash. I unjammed the machines that ate people's quarters, kept the soap reservoirs topped off, used graffiti gun on the swastikas, and refilled the flying lasso condom dispenser in the bathroom. Jack would stop by in his truck when I was working and ask how my folks were doing and for a free wash. He promised that he'd let me take the boat out to the lake when I was old enough to get my pecker wet. On Tuesday nights, he'd gather cardboard from the warehouse dumpsters, grocery stores, and Kmart, then would soak the load during my Wednesday shift before going to the scale yard at the recycle center. He always used to give me Susan B. Anthony dollar coins for using the hose. The weekend before a meth lab blew the storage unit up and melted the speedboat to its trailer, Jack came by and said he'd like to take me out on the slough to test a slalom ski and some wetsuits he found in one of the units someone had defaulted on. I was sure that after we put the boat in, we were the only people ever to take a speedboat up the slough. His girlfriend looked like a summertime juicy fruit ad, with her blonde hair sucked back as she skied behind the boat. In a shallow, narrow stretch of water by the dairy farm, Jack yelled, "Get ready," over the deafening wind and motor. He slowed down so that his girlfriend sank back, just the tip of her ski and her head bobbing in the water. He pulled her over a place where dead cows were dumped. The headers coming off the engine flared into bugles that had the shimmer of an oily parking lot after a first rain. When she started screaming and crying and begging, he gunned it and pulled her back up into heaven. This is a piece written about Tank Man, the anonymous guy in Tiananmen Square. Stood in front of all those tanks, or right after Tiananmen Square. Tank Man, after Malvern Collar by Lynn Ramsey. The first time I died was April 13th, 1988. In the obituary, I included facts from my real life, but used a false name, Francis Mulcahy, after the character from MASH. I used my mother's IBM Selectric to type it and hand-delivered it to the newspaper. I used the local morgue's return address. Francis Mulcahy, devoted son and dreamer. In the dark hours before my parents got out of bed, I had held the note under the dripping faucet in our kitchen, a few fake tears to make it count. While the cable gods of MTV vibrated through the television tubes of those who lived in the city limit, we were stuck with a monstrous antenna bolted to the side of a fir tree in our backyard. My father sent me up there in any weather, at all times of the day and night, to make adjustments. We belonged to a telephone party line. Where we lived, if you didn't lie about everything, you at least rounded the edges off the facts. There were always neighbors picking up their phones, hands over the receivers, breathing slowly and quietly into the tunnels of their judgment and curiosity. The second time I died, June 4th, 1989, I was a veteran and a war hero, a widower, a Freemason survived by 3 loving sons. I used my full name, the real one. For the next 2 nights, my mother wept and said nothing as a citizen in a white shirt stood in front of a row of advancing Chinese tanks on Chang'an Avenue. He stood there over and over on every channel. No one knew his name, and I never died again. His Mind After the War, After an Autumn Afternoon, by Yasujiro Ozu. Near the end, the walls in my grandfather's mind began to fall away to reveal a series of Japanese gardens. Each morning he moved through the ashy hours until he found himself walking the edge of a pond, admiring the low moon, its light like a cable stretched across the calm water. He would see a perfect replica of himself adrift in a rowboat. From the rowboat, he would look back at himself standing on the shore, each of him believing the other lived the false life. Neither could figure out how to attach himself to the cable of moonlight. They kept a steady eye on one another throughout the day, tending their separate gardens, raking the sand into the motion of the Pacific, each waiting for the other to finally lie down within himself like a chess piece. This is a piece called Concordat, which you'll remember is the agreement the Catholic Church signed with the Nazis to keep things cool. And it references this amazing, what do you call it? Cult, Young Life. It preys on poor kids mostly. Concordat. I got my license when I was 16 and drove myself every Wednesday to Young Life, an evangelical youth ministry where we were at war with the agents of the Antichrist. I discovered that Jesus wanted me to pay for and attend a summer retreat in the woods of Northern California, where I was to join a group of high school boys that would, for 2 weeks, carry 50-foot segments of 12-inch mainline irrigation pipe up a mountain trail passable only by donkey. I was called, so I listened. Jason, our expedition leader, was a college freshman who dressed in fatigues and combat boots. He taught us the lyrics to White Minority. We sang as we worked. We were rednecks from dead industrial towns, inner city kids, and suburban misfits. Jason reminded us that we were God's soldiers, all in equal standing with the Lord, called to carry pipe. We were going to bring water to the desert. We would topple Pharaoh's army. In another country, in another war, one of our hands attached the wire to Bonhoeffer's neck. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, great Catholic philosopher, one of many conspirators to tried to kill Hitler and failed during the war. Just a few more. The cannery, after On the Waterfront. I've fallen in love with my own cruelty. I fold the black wings toward the center of its body and sew it onto my head like a fashionable hat. I pretend not to notice others pretending not to notice as I stroll along the docks, flipping an imaginary white cane in front of me, tapping the old boards as if punctuating a delightful sentence. When a woman from the cannery walks towards me on her way home from work, she passes right through me. In that moment, we are both tourists in my body. Her black rubber boots hum with fish scales that swim in their desire to find the smallest traces of light. It's a fun book to read from because I'm enjoying knowing what the other stories are, the matching ones. They're quite good. Josh is a great writer. Let's see. Different Fires After Antichrist by Lars von Trier. Trish and I started dating during one of those long summers when nearly everyone I knew lost their job, got divorced, and became convinced through the ramblings of AM radio talk jocks that the slash piles burning on the logging ridges were actually the ceremonial human sacrifices of satanic cults. Trish would only let me undress her if we role-played. It started simply enough. A livestock veterinarian called out to deliver a foal late at night, only to find the farmhand's crippled daughter alone in the barn. But then we started doing things like chasing a fistful of diet pills with gin, emptying the knife drawer onto the bed, and going at it until someone cried for mercy. One time we did it on the ground beyond the guardrail of the ocean overlook, the sun dropping into the horizon like a battle flare, disclosing an enemy's location. The orange glow over the Pacific could have been a village on fire. There we were, too far away to send for help, but too close not to admire it. The musical, After the Friends of Eddie Coyle, by Peter Yates. Louder Than the Rain. The musical. Among the several ways I died in my sleep this week, the worst was certainly when an old girlfriend took me to see a musical called Your Inevitable Compliance. All right. And two more. How am I doing here?
Take your time.
All right. Thin Air After Solaris by Andrei Tarkovsky. The book is structured so that it begins with references to the Vietnam War, goes up through the Cold War as seen through the 80s, through American eyes, and it ends with three sketches by Tarkovsky, who wrote under the Soviet, or who directed under the Soviet regime, and then in Sweden ultimately. So it ends with this sort of Cold War focus, Soviet references. Thin Air After Solaris by Andrei Tarkovsky. My first real girlfriend used to pick me up from my shift at the cannery and drive us to the lighthouse overlook on the Old Coast Highway before she took us back to my apartment. She was convinced she could read my thoughts. I loved riding in her Corvair, its rear engine and orange factory paint. I always suspected she was a pathological liar and a hustler. But there was something so tender about her oddities. The way she moved in with me the same afternoon I met her in the mini-mart at the cheapo gas station. The way she had hot-glued green plastic army soldiers across her dashboard, the inside of the windshield, and upside down from the bare metal roof. When reading my thoughts, she would say, "Your mind is like a watercress." The truth is, I liked the way she talked about my past lives, the way we sat with our backs to the dead town I'd grown up in, facing the salty black ink of the Pacific. She entered the rooms of my mind and described in detail how warm or cool they were, how they smelled, how the floors creaked as they settled into the night, how I looked sitting at the desk in the very last and smallest room, how she touched the scar on the back of my head and said she could tell I was thinking about how beautiful she looked. I was happy to give her all I had. Yeah. This is the last piece in the book that Josh wrote. It ends with this sketch called Godzilla, After the Sacrifice by Andrei Tarkovsky. The summer before the attacks, I took my son to visit the World Trade Center. They had a system where they would take your photo at the lobby in front of a cardboard backdrop of the Twin Towers before you went up to the observation deck. You could buy the photo for $20 and you were high on the view. They didn't glass you in, and I noticed that my son was in inclining his head slightly upwards, and had his arms spread out like a paper airplane. Birds passed below us, clouds, city, islands, then the sea. My kid started flapping his hands up and down very quickly, and I remembered how I used to do the same thing when I was a child, in dreams where I hovered over the houses and lawns. On our next trip to the city, we avoided the sight, but my son wanted to see the scale model of New York City out in Queens. It was an exhibit in which every building had been meticulously reconstructed in an enormous room. The Twin Towers were still standing. Nobody could bear to knock them down, but they had a pink ribbon wrapping the two skyscrapers together. My son stamped around on the walkway above the model city, miming the crushing and kicking over of buildings with his feet, then opening his mouth and roaring silently like a prehistoric beast. "I'm Godzilla," he said. "Spare Queens," I said. I should probably tell you that my son is invisible. Other people can't see him standing there by my side in the tourist photo from the Twin Towers. And nobody but me heard him speak in the exhibition where we stood above the helpless cardboard city. I couldn't say that he's an imaginary boy, but it is true that he doesn't seem to age. He tells me it's better to imagine that the world is filled with invisible children. Thank you very much.